Historically, why has Marvel had more events in DC? Is it something about the company that's special or different or editorial mandated? Let's talk about that. Hey, this is Perch. I got the question: why is it that Marvel has more events than DC? And the question I thought was a smart one because it came at it not from the typical kind of fan perspective, but more from a pragmatic one, which is to say, Marvel has done better than DC financially. They've typically, with a few blips, certainly in the schedule, like when the New 52 came out, there was a brief change. When Rebirth came out, there was a very brief change where the unit share and the dollar share tipped to DC's way. But generally speaking, over the last 10 years, Marvel has dominated dollar and unit share, and we won't go into what that means. If you're like, what does that mean? There's other videos to explain that. I can link to them in the comments below, or just search dollar unit share. Myself and lots of other people will go into that and explain for you. But why, if Marvel leads, so I think the logic goes this way: if Marvel leads in unit and dollar share most months, and Marvel does more events and more reboots, or sorry, reboot, but relaunch of a title, new number ones, then why doesn't DC do the same? Is DC allergic to money? If I mean, there comes a point where it's like that if you can't beat them, join them. And if DC is trying to kind of please their Time Warner masters, or now Time Warner AT&T masters, doesn't it make sense for DC to move to a yearly event model or twice a year event model and lots of relaunches of number one issues? Why not? Sure, some of the fans may hate it, but if it works for Marvel. And I think first of all, there's a couple things. It's a very intriguing question because, yeah, I mean, on the surface, I think it's true. If DC wants to kind of bridge the gap, then they need to stop trying to reinvent the wheel and just start taking a page from what Marvel and DC do. They need to just copy what they do, because I think there's a real interesting model there where it's been interesting for me in general with creative endeavors where you see somebody who's very popular who establishes a model. They establish something that works, for better or worse. They establish something that is successful, and it generates sales or gets attention. And then there are some people who copy it and they achieve the same success or maybe a little less success. And there are others who kind of stick to their guns and they say, nope, I'm not copying that. We're our own creative entity and we do our own thing, and we're not going to be derivative, and no copying here. And on one hand, I admire that stance. On the other hand, it's a business, so copy. I think the creative separate entity train left the station quite some time ago, so you might as well cash in. I mean, it's like at some point, it's like with Vertigo. I remember having a very passionate argument with somebody that says, well, Vertigo, that's the place where the original ideas happen. That's the place where the really amazing work happens. Very creative, top talent, people who are rebelling against the system, people who are really doing something outside of the mainstream. And I remember saying, well, yeah, but I think it's kind of the mainstream at this point. Well, when you live in a very binary society where half of the country, or 41%, 42% of the country is really anti-Trump, and 41% is really pro-Trump, then being putting out an anti-Trump comic book is no longer kind of bucking the mainstream. That's picking one of the two mainstreams. That's all that is. I think I look at some of the work that Neil Gaiman did back in the 80s and 90s, and in the 90s especially. Back in the 90s, 80s a little early. I don't know what I'm talking about. The 90s. And there's a lot of real new culture, alternative culture, bucking the establishment kind of work going on. But now, 20 years later, so many people have copied what Gaiman did, and so many people have gone to that same well, that I don't think you could say, hey, this stuff is avant-garde, bright, breathtaking creativity anymore. It's kind of it's there. It is the mainstream. At some point, if you are a successful indie artist or you're a successful alternative band, if you're really successful, you stop being alternative. People in music figured this out quite some time ago. You stop being alternative. I remember an interview where the interviewer was talking to Tori Amos, and Tori Amos is describing herself as being, outside of the mainstream and very, very much an independent band, barely known. And the interviewer was like, I don't know. I mean, you sold a lot of your last album. I'm just saying, you're signed with a pretty major label, and you know, are you outside the mainstream? I don't know. And I don't, as I recall, the interview kind of degenerated from there, but it's normal. So I've gone a long way from where I originally started. Let me pull it back. I think that I've heard people at DC claim and say that they don't want to be Marvel, that they want to keep their own creative vision, their own creative spirit. And on one hand, I think that's fine, but on the other hand, I think with some of the moves, with the New 52, with some of the stuff that Didio did, Didio, I don't know what I'm saying. That he did, I think that you're already the mainstream. You've already kind of abandoned that, true creative torch. So, why not? But I think that if DC copied what Marvel did, let's say that they, relaunched their books every few years. Let's say, Tom King's been on Batman for a while, but let's say Tom King goes off Batman and we just say, okay, brand new #1 issue. G. Willow Wilson's ending her run on Wonder Woman. We're going to relaunch with a new #1 issue. Kelly Sue is ending her Aquaman run. We're going to, or I don't know if she is or not, but, we're going to relaunch with a brand new #1 issue for the next creative team. We're just going to do that the Marvel way. I'm not sure. First of all, I do think that would increase some sales. Let's just get that out of the way. I think there would be some numbers that would go up. I think DC fans have not been, burned as much as Marvel fans, and that there's still a lot of collectors out there who get all the issues, and I think they would be PO'd that DC was doing the same stuff. But for the next couple of years, they would suck it up and go down that path anyway. I'm a little bit surprised that with Bendis coming over and with some of the, the way he's absolutely tried to curate the books in the same way he did at Marvel. Including bringing in kind of his buddies and kind of how he wants the stories to run and the arcs and all the rest. I'm surprised that we're not seeing more kind of #1 switches, and I'll be very curious if he does take over Batman or he does do something along those lines where he goes to his next big book, because right now he's done Superman and one relaunched and the other didn't, but they're taking away in kind of a way it did. I mean he got to come on at 1001. So, I mean, it was, kind of a #1. And then Legion of Superheroes is a #1 issue, and all the new books he launched have all been #1s. So if suddenly, Bendis hops over to The Flash or to Wonder Woman or to Batman, are they going to give him a #1 issue? I'm very curious to see what they do. I suspect they will. But I mean, it is the law of diminishing returns in general. I think Marvel has the benefit of kind of building up this big kind of cinematic feel to a lot of their universe. So I think that they benefit from that, and I think that allows people to. Well, I think they've crossed the chasm. So I think they started relaunching with a lot of new #1s about 8 years ago. I think it pissed people off, but they did it anyway. They sucked it up, and they lost some people, but they kept others, and they were able to get some marketing out of it. And then people grumbled hard for 5 or 6 years. And then I think we're now coming to the other end of it, where people just expect it so much that they've kind of given up on, it's like, well, screw it. I guess it's a #1. Why not? They've kind of come to the other end of that valley, and at this point, they've lowered the bar for themselves so much that it's like, I guess we're going to get a new #1. Okay. But the other half of that is events. So events is actually a more interesting question, which is to say, if you've got some of the top DC talent and you did kind of an event, you got outside of the book and you did a dedicated event. DC always they seem like they tip their toe into events, but they never like go all in or avoid them either. They'll do a kind of a themed storyline with Teen Titans. And Deathstroke, or was it just Titans and Deathstroke? They'll do something where there's a crossover. The Lazarus effect. I can't remember the name of that event, but they'll do little things like that. They'll do little kind of mini events, but they won't go all in on saying, all right, we're doing an event. And we're seeing more of that now. We have Event Leviathan running. We have the City of Bane storyline going. We have the Year of the Villain. They're kind of trying a bunch of stuff. There's a lot of mud in the water, if you will, of them kind of testing everything. But what we don't yet see is the kind of the very typical kind of Marvel event machine rolling at DC. And given the numbers of the comics that come in, I think DC probably, and please don't shoot me for saying this, but I think they could actually go down that path, and it would probably boost their sales significantly. And if they did it right, probably wouldn't irritate their fans either. Now, right now, you may be hopping up and down saying you completely and absolutely disagree with that last statement, but hear me out here. DC has done events, and people remember things like Blackest Night and some of these other events very fondly. Particularly been helmed by Jeff Johns and even the ones with Grant Morrison. I think Final Crisis. Some of these, there's been some events that really stand out in fans' minds as being very very strong, good events, things that delivered good story moments, and people remember them fondly. And DC can do more of those. Maybe one of the reasons why people remember them fondly is because they're few and far between. But there's kind of been a lack of kind of name writers or name creators coming in and saying we're going to do some event that's going to really put a spotlight and a focus on these characters. The challenge is, and I feel like at Marvel, the events have often been at the cost or the expense of the independent books. The regular titles have suffered. I think the Avengers and Thor both suffered as we transitioned over to War of the Realms. It's kind of leaves some rubble behind. And with DC, I think their strength of some of the individual books they can't afford that dip. So they would have to pull off an interesting hat trick where they would need to do very similar to what the Sinestro War. Is that what it was? The Sinestro Corps War and Blackest Night both managed to bring additive things to the individual titles and be an event. And it's a tricky line to do. But I mean, in general, I think DC probably does need to go down the event path. The other kind of thing that DC has struggled with, at least of late, and I believe, if you look at 2 years ago, you had Metal come out and you had Doomsday Clock get started. And Metal, was for all intents and purposes a pretty neat, tight event. It had the Batman Who Laughs kind of miniseries that came out of that, and then Batman Superman is continuing to follow along on that thread. Everything there is kind of the toy box that Snyder opened up. And, whether you like Batman Who Laughs, think he's overexposed, didn't like Metal, whatever you think about any of that stuff, Metal was successful in the sense that it sold well. Its tie-ins have generally sold well. Even if you think that the Batman Who Laughs is overexposed, it sells quite well. Sold quite well, I should say. And Batman Superman is selling quite well. So all this stuff is actually doing its job, whether you like it or not. And I think that's probably what the Marvel events are like. Whether you like it or not, many of the Marvel events do a fair job of selling well. Where I think DC has an advantage that they don't take advantage of more is that DC's events, when they have done them and done them well, like Final Crisis, like Metal, like Blackest Night, they have the additive effect of the individual titles benefit or boost. Whereas Marvel's, they've started to be stagnant or actually reduce. So that's a strength that DC has. And the trick there is just, get top writers to do it. Make sure that whatever storyline you're crafting, it doesn't completely abandon the core title. I think this is something that Marvel does. It's kind of baffling, really, is the core title just kind of gets forgotten. It shifts into the backseat immediately when the events start. And that's not the case with a lot of DC books. I think you look at Metal and some of the plot lines that came out of that, they're their own standalone books. They're very much, it is the center of Batman Superman right now is kind of what happened with Metal. The source wall breaking is key to what's going on in Justice League. So it is these events happen, like War of the Realms happened, and there were not big elements that came out of War of the Realms that strengthened the other books. Thor's going to immediately segue into kind of the King Thor at the end of time. The Avengers is off with Ghost Rider and the haunted Celestial Head. I mean, it's and if you look back, Secret Invasion, or sorry, Secret Empire came out. Big lead up to that with Captain America and everything else. The actual event goes out. The core books are kind of forgotten during that time period. And what was, I mean, probably the biggest fallout, the stuff that they kind of kept going with, was what Duggan did with Deadpool. I mean, beyond that, Captain America's kind of tiptoed into if they're going to utilize, Evil Cap, but not really done much with it. Nothing else has really come. But look at a book like Civil War or Secret Invasion. Get it right that time. Both of those books had significant after effects that the core titles did, and I think that's where Marvel has lost the plot on a bit, and DC, in theory, has not. But they're just not doing enough events. So probably, you want to compete with Marvel, you want to get back in the game there, then probably more events is what you need to do, and you need to make sure that they benefit the core books. I don't know. It's weird making a pitch for more events, and I'm going to have to go have a drink after that, after this one. But what do you think? Leave me your comment below. Like, subscribe, click the bell for notifications. But otherwise, thanks for listening. Bye.